Nick, I must begin this interview by congratulating you on a fantastic performance in Heartbeat. Are you as pleased with this or more pleased with this than some of the other things you've done in recent years?
Well, I'm very pleased with it, but I was pleased with North Dallas 40. Although I think North Dallas 40 on an overall picture there were some flaws that we weren't able to work out because of the Hollywood mentality. But and I was pleased with Who'll Stop the Rain. But I'm pleased. I'm very pleased. One thing that I'm very happy about is that we approached the piece as an ensemble piece, a three-character piece, which is virtually almost impossible in film because you have to keep three characters alive and keep the audience connected with three characters. And it's very, very difficult to do because your focus is spread. But for an actor to work in that kind of situation, it's marvelous fun to really share that kind of relationship, Now, and that's what I enjoyed, and Sissy, and John Hurt, and we all just worked like a repertory situation, kind of.
Did you ever talk with Carolyn Cassidy ahead of time to get some idea of what Neil really was like and how you would best approach the role?
I spent a lot of time with Carolyn. Now, Carolyn stayed with us through the whole filming, and her children were there. And so I had a lot of talking with Carolyn. Now, and then of course the research I did was through all the material that's written about Neil, through his own little book that he wrote called The First Third, through the biographies on Jack and all of this kind of thing. So there was a wealth of material. And also in the 60s I knew of Neil Cassidy. I had never met the man, so I knew of the mythology of the man. And our decision, whenever you approach a character or a person that actually lived, you're in a real precarious ground because how do you interpret it? Because, the public remembers or recognizes the people, and they say, well, that's not the way he moved, that's not the way he stuff. So I stayed away from the actual form of Neil, because he was a verbiage, kinetic energy person, and tried to research out the actual essence of Neil, of what he meant to a lot of different people. And we played on the essences of that quality, the inner quality of it. And that's what you want to communicate to the audience,
In the movie, Allen Ginsberg is not really portrayed as Allen Ginsberg.
Right.
Why is that?
Allen reacted very violently to us doing this piece. And Ferlinghetti and Ken Kesey and the men that knew these actual men, there is, and rightly so, there's a little bit of a personal, private jealousy, or not jealousy, sacredness, about the quality of these men and what they did. And they were very, very reluctant to allow younger people to try to interpret that period. And Allen just didn't like the whole idea of us doing it. He felt the script didn't capture it right. But you see, I turn around and say to Allen Ginsberg, I have a relationship to Jack Kerouac myself. I read his book On the Road in 1959. He represents something to me, too. So I have a right to interpret him, or interpret Neil Cassidy and that thing myself. So, and we didn't make the film for Allen Ginsberg, or Ken Kesey, or Ferlinghetti. Those guys wouldn't go see it anyway. I mean, they knew the men. Well, what is important is to translate these people in the sense of the literature and the movement of the country and what they were involved in for a new audience. That's partly the problem of the film, is partly that it is educational to a certain sense, and that's difficult for a film to do that, because we cover from the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s. And then also, it's about common people to a certain degree that literally instigated change in this country without consciously realizing they were doing that. And that's how change happens, you know. Change doesn't come about by a politician sitting in Washington and saying, now we're going to do this. It comes from the average citizen, the farmer in this, that is confronted with something, and then the consciousness happens, and change happens that way. Well, that's what these individuals were involved in.
Nick, the film stops short of their death.
Right.
Some people are going to quarrel with that. What would you say to them?
I would say that there's no sense or rhyme or reason to see the destruction of something that was very positive elements of life. I mean, you know, we all come to the end of our lives, and the process of the end of our lives is a decay. But what we leave in human contact is that period of time where we were supportive. And that's what's important about these men, not the fact that their deaths were kind of tragic and horrible in a sense.
Drug-related.
Yeah, Neil's was drug-related, Jack's was alcoholism. But that's their own personal, you know, abuse and problems. But that alcoholism is not why Jack rode on the road, you know, you see, and that's what we're talking about, we're talking about the positive elements that these individuals created and gave to our society, not the negative elements. You know, the negative elements might be, you know, Neil's death of an overdose. That's not a good example, or anything else like that. But there was a very positive element that these men, you know, brought to society, and so that's what we focus on. So there's no reason to go into the death, you know.
Nick, do you consider yourself, as far as Hollywood is concerned, do you consider yourself a bit of a rebel?
No, not personally. No, I've been working theater for 14, 15 years. Now film for the last 5 or 6 years. To do a profession like that, you know, it takes discipline, it takes responsibility. That's not qualities of a rebel. You know, the journalists create that simply because you know, there's an image quality to film and film actors, and so the journalists will say, well, Nick doesn't comb his hair, so he must be a rebel, you know, or Nick lives in Agora, California instead of Beverly Hills. Well, I'm not living in Agora because I don't like Beverly Hills. It's because I grew up in the Midwest in small towns, and that's a comfortable environment for me, and I like space, you know. But it's not because I think Beverly Hills is what's the word, a plastic place, and the people are plastic. That's not my attitude of that at all. It's just the comfort of the style of living. If I was a plumber, I'd live in Agora. You know what I mean? You know, this is a choice of how you want to live, you know.
I can appreciate that because I come originally from the Midwest. I relate very well to Texas. I've been here all of my adult life. You couldn't hire me to live in New York or Los Angeles.
Well, yeah, you know, you take New York or Los Angeles, and you're essentially dealing with the ends of the country. Now, I've always felt that they're the phonetic ends of the country. I mean, you know, they're basically monetary cities. And so you got the money flowing in and the transitory situations. And New York has a tradition, but L.A., you can't say L.A. is a city. I mean, it's a really shiftless, rootless kind of town. Not like what you grow up in the Midwest or Texas or something like that, where you have a history, you know. But that's just L.A., you know. There's nothing wrong with that, except don't go to L.A. hoping to make it Waterloo, Iowa, you know, because it's just not, and you can't get it, you know. So for a lot of people that go into L.A. from Iowa, from Minnesota or Texas or everything, it is a really little bit of a culture shock to them, you know. I don't think in L.A. I've ever found a local bar. You know, in any city you go to across the country, there is always the local bar. You know, there's a lot of bars, but nobody knows each other. You know what I mean? Which really isn't conducive to exchange. You know, the great thing about bars in America, especially there was one up in Excelsior, Minnesota that I worked at called the Muni. Boy, you go in there, you discuss everything, and usually what we had was a bet when the ice would break on the lake, because they'd put an old car out in the middle of the lake, and when the ice would melt, the car would go through. You know, so. But that's hard to find in LA. You don't find that in LA. See? I miss that. You know, that's why I live on the Gore.
Okay, Bob, why don't you